Hey guys, what's up? Stock Retail coming back to you. Probably at about 70% today. If you followed me on Twitter, you know that I've been having a fight with COVID over the last week. So I apologize in advance. Probably a few coughs and clearing the throat this video. But we're here. We're fighting through as apes do. We don't leave. Wanted to finally get out a couple videos that I had kind of promised I'd be doing. The first of which, because we're all tracking that threshold list, might see that we're on it for day 25 today. Not sure yet. But FTDs has been a topic of conversation, front of mind. I had done a video once before on FTDs kind of talking about just being cautious not to buy into too much hopium on sort of T plus 35 and some other things. This is another angle. I'm seeing a lot of accounts, at least on Twitter anyway, probably a few clickbait on YouTube as well, that are basically, let's call it mathing FTDs incorrectly. And I want you guys to know how to get this right. It's a common mistake. It's something that apes have tried to correct, frankly, for years. But, we're constantly rotating in new people. There's millions of us. There are still some people getting it wrong. And so I want to help you guys know how to get it right. So we're going to talk about that today. Before I do, just a little bit of bullishness on the movies. Awesome to see. I actually looked at the last 7 days. The domestic box office is like 488 million. I'm not even counting Haunted Mansion's previews on Thursday night, nor am I counting, there was another, like a little indie horror flick that's coming out, so I'm not counting that one either. And even without those preview dollars, like I said, domestic box was 488 million. For context, that might actually be the second biggest week in the domestic box office's history. It's bonkers, guys, how big it is right now. And obviously it's not just Barbenheimer, because you've got Indy, you've got Mission Impossible, Elemental has shown legs, as family movies often do. Movies are just, to say they're rocking right now would be a massive understatement. Like I said, I looked all the way back to 2017. The only week that I saw from at least 17 until now that beat it was because of Endgame. So like even last year we had like Thor and Minions were crushing it one week. That was like $140 million less, or no, $150 million less, I think, than the week we just did. So that's how big movies are right now. It's just massive. We're talking kind of all-time numbers. And we've got the rest of the quarter left. Here I'm giving a nod to Turtles and the Meg 2. They're coming out together. So shout out to the AMC Gorillas account that kind of made this graphic, putting those together, Muta Meg, a little bit like a play on Barbenheimer. So there's going to be a lot of energy still for movies the rest of the quarter. I'll make some other videos soon. I'll do my Q2 forecast. Obviously earnings is coming up, so I'll make sure to get that number out before the earnings call so we can see how right or wrong I am. You know that I believe in positive earnings, so I think 8/8 is going to be a really big day for us. That's kind of an epic moment in history, in my opinion. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. And Q3 actually, because of The Sound of Freedom, because of Barbenheimer, sorry, there's that COVID a little bit there. But because those three in particular are so far beyond anything I forecast, little hat tip there, when I get to sharing the Q3 forecast with you, I'm going to be talking about positive earnings in Q3 as well. It used to be really on the fence. I think things are looking real good for Q3 right now, so let's see. So more to come on all that. Today, let's dive into FTDs, and let's learn how to get this right, and let's learn how you can start to avoid a little bit of clickbait on FTDs, or in some cases, if it's good apes, how to just gently correct them and help them to get it right. So here's the bottom line. The biggest thing, the most common mistake I see that's completely wrong about FTDs is people try to add them up. You cannot add up FTDs. This is a screenshot here from the SEC's website. So you go to the SEC, that's where the FTD report is. If you ever see anybody sharing the sort of day-by-day breakdown of FTDs, now I'm not talking about the threshold report, that's on the NYSE's website. I'm talking about the actual FTD numbers by day. People are getting those from the SEC website. I used to download them myself, and then now there's just so many people who do it. I haven't done it for a while, but I did go pull them today, and we'll talk about that. So look at what I've underlined. This is the SEC's website explaining to you how to read this data. That's always important. If you're going to use data, you probably should know what it's actually telling you. All right, so fails to deliver on a given day, and notice what I've also circled, are a cumulative, kind of a running total, a cumulative number of all fails, notice this word outstanding. It's only the ones that are still outstanding until that day, plus new fails that occurred that day, less, so minus, fails that settle that day. Guys, it's kind of like a running bank account. We're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's follow the rest of what I've highlighted. The figure is not a daily amount of fails. Let's read that again. The figure is not a daily amount of fails, but a combined figure that includes both new fails on the reporting day as well as existing fails. There's something in reporting called double counting, or if you're kind of in reporting, you might call it dupes, duplicates. Or like think of it also like a bathtub or something. If there was some water left over from yesterday and I add new water, I don't like recount yesterday's water and double it up and say I have double the water in the bathtub. I don't. So let's kind of, we're going to go through a little bit more, and then I'm going to give you a real kind of easy to understand example. But just want to hammer home, you cannot add these up. And that's what I see a lot of accounts all over Twitter doing, and I've seen it with some YouTube people. People will say, man, look at the back half of June. I'll make up a number here. There's 50 million Ftd'S, and it's like, no, not even close. That's not true. So let's keep going, and then we'll talk about it. I want to also talk about fungibility versus something, not fungible. If you think about like when you put $50 in your bank account and say you also took $50 out, the bank doesn't care what $50 is which. Like cash is something called fungible. Doesn't matter, what's the $50 in your account and what's the $50 that went out. That honestly doesn't matter. But with Ftd'S, they're not fungible, and that's going to matter. We're going to talk about why. So it means like if, let's say institution A had a million shares of Ftd'S, but institution B, and institution A clears a million shares of their Ftd'S, but institution B brings in a million shares of Ftd'S. So the total on the report wouldn't change. Remember that last screen we just talked about? It's the what goes out plus what comes in. Take a million out, put a million in. The Ftd report would show no change. But actually, like the T plus 35 clock and all the things we talk about and whether it's on the threshold list, that would radically change. So for example, let's say this institution A had needed to clear theirs, and they go clear them, but institution B creates a bunch of new ones. We might be sitting here going, how could it be on the threshold list again? Like it's supposed to be cleared. Well, we might not know behind the scenes, actually, one group did clear theirs and another group started from day one. But we just saw the same million units show up on both days. So there's a lot of math behind this, and you've got to understand it's not all things equal here. There were a million shares from institution A that disappeared in this case, and a million new Ftd'S that show up. The report might say a million either way, but those are not the same Ftd'S. That matters. And it still points to corruption, guys. So I'm not wiping this away. We're going to talk about corruption. We're going to talk about how this is a real problem. But I also just want you guys to understand the data so you don't scream bloody murder and kind of make apes look like we don't know what we're talking about. All right, so let's look at the SEC's language again. This is at the bottom here, another screenshot straight from the SEC's language about this report. They say, thus, it's important to note that the age of fails cannot be determined by looking at these numbers, right? So that's what I just talked through. Let's say you had a million shares that kept getting passed around like a hot potato from institution to institution. In theory, those million shares of Ftd'S could show up for like a year, but never hit like a T plus 35 or something like that, okay? And we would sit here and kind of talk about them being on the threshold list way too long. And so you see how you start to hear language that's out there on the internet that perhaps you're getting new context to. All right, so then let's keep going. In addition, the underlying source or sources of the fails to deliver shares is not necessarily the same as the underlying source of the fails to deliver shares reported the day prior or the day after. I think I've kind of covered all of that. The point is, it's a hard number, but it's not telling you how long have those been there, because there's ins and outs every day that add up to that number. But what if I take a million out, but you put a million in? There's actually no change to the number in theory, but there's a really big change to the implications of what that number means. Okay, let's talk about why it's a little more like the balance in your bank account to sort of prove why you cannot add these up. So let's pretend this was your bank account for a week. We're just going to use easy numbers. And let's say on Monday you went to bed and you had $1,000 in your checking account. And then Tuesday when you go to bed you had $900. So you obviously spent a little money on Tuesday. On Wednesday maybe you both spent money and brought some new money in, and you got $1,100 when you go to bed. So you can kind of see all these numbers. We're hovering around 1,000 every day. A little bit over, a little bit under. At the end of the week, Would you look at that and say, man, I had $7,000 this week? You would not do that, right? You never had $7,000. You're not adding up the balance, that word balance, from your checking account day over day. What you might actually say is, hey, I averaged keeping $1,000 in my account this week. You would not add these all up and say you had $7,000, but that is the mistake people are doing with FTDs. They're adding up something that's a balance, and that's not correct. So, you never had $7,000, just like, we never had 50 million FTDs or whatever for the back half of June. The most you ever had was that 1.2K. Some days you had less, and you definitely don't have all that money, so you can't add it up. You just wouldn't do that in your real life. Think about FTDs like your bank account. It's a running total at the end of every day. That's all it is. You can't add them up. Finally, a note on timing, and then we're going to maybe talk through some data just to look at it. You probably already know because you see people tweet this. We get just a twice a month update. So the first half of a month, so like the first half of July, we're about to get here at the end of July. And then the second half of July, we would get the 15th of August, which is why, let me show you. So we've got the second half of June out there right now because we don't quite have the first half of July yet. And this is what everybody's been talking about, right? There absolutely is a huge spike. So let's look at this. I've just added my own column. All these first bunch of columns come straight from the report, and then I've added what's the daily change, because this is what I'm trying to help you see of how you want to look at this. So you can see on the 15th of June, we landed, think of it as a landing number. At the end of the day, there was like this 2.6 million shares of FTDs on Ape. Guys, that's way too high. It should never be anything remotely approaching that. Go look at FTDs on like Apple, even Tesla, any other major company, heck, most even small companies. You're never going to see FTDs like what you see on AMC. So I am not saying there's not corruption. In fact, there's massive corruption this is pointing to and massive problems that need to be stopped, but I still just want you to get it right. All right, so we had these 2.6 million shares of FTDs we carried in and landed on the end of June 15th, and then you could see the end of June 16th is 3.1. So again, this is like your checking account. You don't say, well, we had 5.6 million shares. No, you ended with 3.1 million, and so the change, you went up 500,000 that day. The next day, it actually went down 200,000. 2.9 million that we landed on. Now remember, think about all the brokers, wholesalers, market makers, everybody moving all our shares all over the place and creating synthetics as well. All the ins and outs we have with 3.8 million of us hodlers, all kinds of day traders, funds, institution, everybody putting their hands in this pot. So think about how many different institutions moved FTDs in or cleared FTDs out. There's a lot of noise behind this data. So what this is not telling you is, let's say for this 2.9 million, how much of that was from this 2.6 million up here and how much is like brand new? Couldn't tell you. It's not, you can't look at that at this level of data. We'd need a lot more data transparency to get to that, which is what we ought to all be advocating for. We should have timestamps on every single FTD. Frankly, I think we should have unique identifiers for every single share, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. All right, but so you can see it does start to spike. So on the 18th, we go up by 3 million, back down by 1 million the next day. And think of this like have you ever tracked the borrowed shares like on, say, Ortex or Fintel or somewhere? And sometimes you'll see that maybe in a day, 6 million new borrows happened and, 5 million shares were returned. So for a net of 1 million new. So there can be all kinds of ins and outs, like I said. But look at the back half of the month. Let's jump down here to June 21st. Boom, we popped by another 3 million shares. The next day we popped by another almost 4 million shares. Now we're getting up to 12.5 million FTDs. It's insane. And then you can see we kind of trickled down a little bit, but then popped by another million to end the month, almost in the month at 13 million FTDs. That's insane. We should never have that number ever. It points to all kinds of market problems. It's not just market inefficiency either. I believe this is corruption. We'll talk about why. So, key you should be taking away, if anyone adds up all these numbers and then like multiplies by the price and tells you the total value, they're full of it. They haven't, some of them are good apes. I've actually seen some good apes do this, but it means they haven't done their DD. They don't know how to accurately look at this number. Again, I say that gently as for the good apes because at the very beginning of my time as an ape, I made the same mistake, right? So I'm not talking about a mistake I haven't made, but it's also been known now how to get this right for, since the spring of 2021, we all started correcting each other. So at this point, there shouldn't be too many excuses anymore. People need to pay attention and we need to get this right. So please start helping correct others. I do suggest doing it gently so we don't kind of shoot each other. Like, let's support apes. But yeah, we got to get this right. All right, final thoughts. So AMC's FTDs are insanely high, and this has gone on for nearly 3 years. This is a carryover all the way back to January 2021 when it was even higher than it is now, but it was, it's just always been a real problem. Look at how many times over the years we've been on the threshold list or just had these FTDs without even getting on the threshold list. I can explain another time how you get on the threshold list. It basically has to do with having a certain percent of your float on FTDs for a certain amount of days. That's the shortest answer on that one. Anyway, FTDs absolutely can be a sign of fraudulent trading. So you can go on the internet, just look up, just ask that question of the internet. Are FTDs a sign of fraud? And absolutely you will find all over the place it's a sign of all kinds of bad behavior that is robbing us blind. The shortest version is effectively stealing liquidity. Like if I'm a broker-dealer and I, take your money but don't give you stocks for a while, I'm effectively using your money as kind of a credit float. I'm floating on that cash without actually going and getting shares for you. So I'm letting you kind of finance my liquidity. And frankly, that's cheating. I don't like it. And what's more is they're basically playing another kind of arbitrage where they're saying, I will take your money today and I'll deliver you the stock another day. Well, guess who is then motivated to drive the price of the stock down? The person who has to deliver you your shares, right? Because it's really great if I take $5 from you today, but deliver you, say, a $4.70 stock in a few days. I've now effectively pocketed some of your money, right? So I just totally see it as cheating. It's basically a way of naked shorting too. I guess I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So effectively it's effectively naked shorting. It's you've seen there's an account on Twitter. I don't know if I'll pronounce her name right. Suzanne Trimbath maybe. She knows an awful lot about market mechanics and has fought against corruption for a long time. She's also known for being a tiny bit prickly, but you know what? Sometimes you gotta have a little fight in the dog. So that I'm fine with that. And she basically says exactly that. Like, why naked short when you can just fail to deliver? It can be a strategic move, and it frankly is. And so you ask yourself, why has AMC effectively had FTDs for 3 years and nothing has changed? So this is really damning. It's a really damning statement on our regulators and politicians and Wall Street. It's a massive problem, massive problem. It's out in the open. You can go see this. Just pull the numbers. And like I said here, this third bullet, in many ways, in my opinion, failing to deliver is actually worse, or at least I don't view it as different than naked shorting. It's effectively stealing liquidity from a purchaser and creates motivation to drive the price of a stock down, even if for someone who does not own that stock. So that's a real problem. It needs to be stopped. It's further proof we're fighting corruption on a massive scale. So like I said, while I'm, let's say, downplaying the level of FTDs compared to maybe people who are erroneously adding these all up, I hope you hear me saying very loudly, I'm not downplaying the issue. It's a major, major issue. And until we see real action, I guess I'm just saying stop believing in price predictions or unproven theories about clearing FTDs. I know when I was a new ape, I bought into it. I got this T plus 35 idea in my head. All right, people would come and point to this. And again, adding them up, they'd say, man, there's these 8.8 million shares that got to be delivered 35 days from here. And then these 12.6 million shares that have to be delivered 35 days from here. It ends up not working that way, guys. We've never seen some spike because of this. Now, that does not mean there aren't basically bodies getting buried. There's all kinds of ways they reset the clock. One of those that we've kind of seen over time is through deep in the money married calls and puts, effectively creating synthetic shares. We've seen basically passing these around like a hot potato. That's where I was talking about, maybe institution A passes them on to institution B and kind of starts the clock again. We've seen tokens, right? Tokens are a real big problem with FTDs. You'll note we're basically 3 for 3 now, guys, on times where a crypto exchange, let's say a la FTX, Bittrex, most recently some of the things you saw from Gary where they were going after some crypto bros. 3 for 3, all 3 times something got shut down related to basically wrapped tokens that kind of touch AMC. All 3 times you have seen the cost to borrow spike like mad and FTDs go through the roof. So you can't tell me, you would not be able to convince me that tokens are not related to them clearing FTDs. I fully believe they're related, and I fully believe they're related to the cost to borrow. We're 3 for 3. Every time some, let's say, fraudulent token gets shut down, we see that spike like crazy. So you're just hearing me say there's all kinds of fraud, manipulation, corruption around this. Keep track of it. It's worth keeping track of, but it's also worth getting right. And as always, I'm so bullish on our stock. Keep track of the movie results. Honestly, I think even more than this, there comes a point where as long as we continue to apply pressure on the business side, these guys will not be able to stop, basically the flood that they've created. It's going to overwhelm them. So continue to support the stock you love, the movies you love, and the popcorn you love, and let's go.